Hi Poonam, it is an honor to interview you. I remember reading about the TV show मैं कुछ भी कर सकती हूँ that you conceived to promote women empowerment and being completely awed by it. From there to learning about your work on women's rights and social justice as the country director of MacArthur Foundation, founder of organizations like Shruti and Dastkar, and currently as the executive director of Population Foundation of India, you have continued to inspire me. I'm sure that this interview will inspire our listeners in the same way. Thank you so much for taking out the time, Poonam. Poonam, how about we start by hearing in your own words about the key chapters in your journey in the development sector? How did you enter it? What made you focus on these specific causes? Just would love to hear about it in your own words.
So, what really, I think I'm a case in point of a negative experience when born, which got converted into an inspiration and a positive experience for me. So I grew up in Delhi. I'm from from a middle class Punjabi family in India, where along with the rest of India in Punjab, there's a huge son preference. And here my poor mother had a third daughter, which was me. So the third daughter was a huge challenge for my very fine parents whose relatives thought that a tragedy had happened. In fact, people returned the sweets that my aunt took, saying, "What is there to celebrate when there's a third girl?" So, I noticed in many different ways that that more than anything else, more than my discrimination, my mother was constantly scorned at and commented at for having, or there was, sort of not sympathy or empathy, but people used to pity her that she had a third daughter. And I noticed that. And then I also noticed some discrimination. I also noticed frustration in my mother. And I realized that it was because I was a sixth daughter. My parents treated me well. So, this is a story of realizing that a girl child was unwanted in our society. So, what I decided that it wasn't about me. When I was 6 years old, I decided it's about being a girl. I didn't know anything more than that. All I knew was that I shouldn't feel upset. I shouldn't feel hurt with anything because it's about a girl. It's not about Poonam. So I separated, and I didn't know the language. But when much later at the Kennedy School, I did a course uh, on leadership development where I learned the language that I'd gone to the dance floor and so on. But going to the dance floor meant I was always observing. I didn't know the words rights and violation, but I was observing that. I learned it much later, the what I was doing. And I was on the dance floor watching women, girls being discriminated against. And so that was one adversity that made me conscious and aware of the inequality that exists for women. But it is so easy for women to be demoralized and so on. My message to everybody is, I didn't know it will become such a strong part of and guide me through my life. So then, when I was in school in class nine, I was a chubby kid, okay? And we had a class called domestic science. We had a domestic science lab where we were taught how to cook, how to iron, wash clothes, and things. Can you imagine getting grades for cooking food that you're going to eat anywhere? So we had a lady called Anaro in the lab, the domestic science lab, who I used to chat to. She was the cleaner. And I said to her, how many children do you have? So she said five. So I asked her what grades they were in. She said, are you crazy? I don't send my children to school. I have five kids. I'm a widow. I cannot afford to go to send them to school. So I said to her, but government education is free. She said, but what about the uniform and the books? And I'm talking about this is sometime in 1968 or so. So she said, no, it'll cost 12 rupees and my salary is 50 rupees. I mean, 50 rupees then was a lot of money, but 50 rupees and 12 rupees is all she needed to send her kids to school. And the lunch money that my parents used to give me to deposit in school was 12 rupees every month. So I deposit that to Anaro. And guess what? Her kids started going to school and I started slimming down. So it was a win-win situation. And I also discovered the joy, the pleasure of giving and doing something about a problem that you see. There is nothing more empowering. So while, I was sent to, because my parents couldn't afford to send me to a private school, third daughter, I went for 5 years to a public, in India, government school is not like US. It's absolutely where only those who have no choice send their children to government schools. And I used to go in a a public bus, and I was sexually abused in the buses. So it was a whole different life that I got exposed to. It would have never happened if I wasn't a third daughter. So for me, it is fantastic that I had all the negative experiences that I could then deal with for others and observe. So when I finished college, I was very clear. First, I didn't want to go to college because I'd started working with people who were physically challenged, blind. I was defying everything wrong in society, but my parents persuaded me to go to college. I finished honors in psychology, undergraduate, and while I was in college, started working with leather workers because we had to do the social service, and it's a government scheme, a national scheme called NSS, and I found that there was not very much happening there. People just marked attendance. Also, there was nothing to learn. So I decided to create my own NSS program. And I went to the closest slum near my college and I found leather workers there who were really exploited in factories. And they were very talented migrants from UP, Bihar, various places. I also was working with some women who were widows in the Red Cross Society. So I started designing bags for them, cloth bags, and for them to stitch. But the leather bags was a different story, but I combined the two and I developed some designing production skills to work with workers, and I used to get them out of factories and get them to become entrepreneurs. So that was how I started. And I wanted to work with leather workers because they were Dalits. In our house, there was discrimination against people who were Dalits, and they are the ones who clean your house. So I noticed that. And so that made me want to, okay, so you see a problem, you have to look for a solution. So I started working with leather workers. And then I set up cooperatives of leather workers, and I wanted to set up a federation of leather workers. But I got more involved with livelihoods, and I came across a lot of women who weren't leather workers, but whose lives were, when I started going to the villages, then that was another learning. I found that women couldn't say their name. So if you asked a woman, what's your name? She would cover her head and say, he, he. I realized that women didn't have an identity. Every woman born in the villages is called so-and-so's daughter, the father's daughter. So if your father's name is John, then you're John's daughter. Then you marry a guy called Dick, you are his wife. Your name is not mentioned, so-and-so's wife. Then you have a child. And when you have a son, you're the son's mother. So, the first thing I did when I was looking at, women's issues was to get a video and get women to say what their name was. Because, even that they couldn't. It was part of their upbringing and culture and social norms. So I then decided I had to start employment opportunities for women and men. So I start, so I created this NGO, co-founded this NGO called Dastkar, which works with self-employed artisans, and most of them are low caste, people who belong to the untouchable Dalit background, or the very nature of their work makes them low in hierarchy. So that's how I began. Inspiration from others who had problems, and inspiration from my own experiences.
It's really interesting to hear how your passion and your discovery at each stage led you to do different things, from working with the NSS to finding Dastkar and working, helping them create their own employment opportunities or being self-employed. So how did you move beyond that, from starting Dastkar to to finding मैं कुछ भी कर सकती हूँ, ideating that, to MacArthur
So
Foundation?
I have always responded to two things. One is the real problems in society. I've never thought of it as a career. What is my expertise going to be in? What is the expertise I have right now? No, you see a problem, you must find a solution. So it was things like that that guided me. It was values, it was way of thinking. So there was no question of I need to get trained, educated, and so on. So when I started working with leather workers, for instance, I was also, I didn't only work with people who produce bags. I went to work with, amongst the Dalits, the lowest caste is the people who flay animals for leather, and then they treat leather. Oh, it's horrendous, when they cut animals or when they're flaying the animal, they don't have any tools, they don't have a space, a platform. So I would watch all the blood fall all over them, and it added to the untouchability and the filth, and it was such horrendous working conditions. So I started going to there was a public sector supported, because there's so much leather work in India, called the Leather Research Technology Institute. I may not be saying the name, I'm maybe mixing the words, but it was a technology institute for leather, for export manufacturers, because India was promoting a lot of, and exporting a lot of, not importing, exporting a lot of leather goods. So I would go there and understand technology of tanning and see how we can bring the tanning technology and the flaying technology closer to these guys, so that they could improve and enhance their incomes, as well as have a cleaner work environment. So you go and learn, there are opportunities. And then I wanted to create I wanted to create a market for artisans. Okay, so what had I done? BA in psychology. I didn't know anything about marketing. And so what did I do? I stormed into the Indian Institute of Management. Of course, people encouraged me, and somebody introduced me to this great professor called Ravi Mathai, who was also the director at some point of IIM Ahmedabad. He was one of the co-founders. And he was setting up something called the Javaja Rural University, and, and a big focus was on marketing. So I went and said, I want to learn from you. This is a very busy guy, a great powerhouse and a management guru. And he said, sure. So how often can you come to Ahmedabad? I'll hold classes for you over the weekend. So, the point is that I am not trying to tell you, I just did it on my own. People stepped out to support me. And let me say to everybody who is thinking of a career, or as a student or as a young person, when you really want to do something, the universe conspires to help you make it happen. Only you have to want to do something, and you want to, the tadka for that, and the masala to spice it is, to get the recipe right, is your willingness, your passion, and your commitment, or your really wanting to do something. And then all these things, people encouraging you, doors open for you, you go into a fast track, even the the fast track is designed by the universe for you. You don't even know what to anticipate. If I was to make a list of the number of people who helped me, and 50% without asking for help, I would go and speak about my work somewhere, and they'd say, oh, but can we do this for you? And we'll give you, go to IIM Ahmedabad, you must meet Ravi Mathai. You also have to aspire to not assume you know everything. You have to aspire to learn from others. And they're there to then support you. Not everybody will support you, but don't be disappointed. Nobody told you that the world is a perfect place and everyone helps everybody, right? But there's enough people who step up to support you. So I went through these classes with Ravi Mathai, set up Dastkar. And the second strategy I always used was co-founded Dastkar. I always bring in the best minds. Don't be scared of best minds. Bring people who are better than you to work with you. A, your work will be better. And two, you can move on to do other things. So I have never, any NGO that I founded, which was in the first 10 years of my work life, I spent no more than 3 years. I moved on because there were great people who could do an equally good or better job. Only thing is, they will take it in another direction and you will take it in another path direction. But all directions are, as long as the aim and the objective is to common, then you're fine. So I went on to set up Dastkar, but then in the meantime, I had to earn money, okay? So so I used to take money from my parents to travel. And, I was very inspired, by the way, also by Gandhiji. So talking about learning, I learned from Gandhi that he didn't know anything about India. When he came back from South Africa, he knew very little about India. He studied in England, then went and practiced law in South Africa. And when he discovered apartheid and discrimination, and he decided to come to India, he didn't know anything. So he decided to take a train, go in a train all over the country, and visited villages and stayed with the poorest so I thought that formula was great. If I wanted to work on poverty, I felt I didn't need to go to, I had studied certain amount. I felt, being a psychology student, I understood people's behaviors a bit, psychology. I said, let's learn about the poverty the Gandhi way. So I spent a lot of time traveling the length and breadth of this country and never stayed in a hotel. I didn't have the money, but the objective was to stay in the house of the poorest person. I could have gone to villages and stayed with better off or with NGOs because, they give you free accommodation. And there are so many NGOs across India. And I used to get in touch with them, but I would not go and stay with them. And the learning that I got, bed bugs. So in one, I chose one house in Maharashtra, 100 kilometers, a tribal area. It's called Dahanu. So I said, yeah, I'll stay with the poorest person. And these guys, the NGO that had gone through, decided, she's this elite girl. Let's see if she can do it, middle class. So they put me up in the house of a guy, Kaluram Dhande, who had the maximum bed bugs. His house was infested with bed bugs. So 10 days later, when I arrived in Bombay to meet an industrialist to raise some money, the chair of our board met me and she said, I don't recognize you. I had bed bug, bites all over my face and body. So, it really helps you understand what people's lives are and the tolerance then and so on. So I used to travel in three tier, which was unreserved. I never had enough money or time to get a reservation. So I used to buy my ticket. I used to travel legally, but there wasn't a seat for me. So I used to sit outside the toilet. It was very smelly when people came in and out. And I remember some people smoking there. And I said, why do you keep smoking? They said, to deal with this smell. So, there were ways to cope with everything. So the smoke really helped me. Don't, having said that, I would say to everyone, don't even begin to smoke. It's the most difficult habit to get out of. I did it, I got out of it, and I keep telling people, I don't interfere in people's life, but smoking is something that I clearly do suggest to people. So I don't mean to say, this is a way to deal with strategy. Okay, it's not a good strategy, by the way. Amongst all the strategies I've used in life, this was the worst one. Okay, so from there I went on to, I started working with, I also have a journalist background. So I started working with, I was trained did a 1 year program after my graduation in journalism. And so I started working with an Indian news magazine called Business India, 9 days a month. And the rest of the time, I used to use that 900 rupees that I got. I used to travel across India to NGOs and to communities. And that's how I learned. And I realized that I understood by then women's issues, rights violations. I felt I had learned, enough about the problems and the solutions. You collaborate with others. So I would go and bring in people, and I met Bill Drayton, who was the friend of a publisher of Business India, and they decided that they were planning a fellowship program, and they decided I would be the first fellow. But they didn't know India, they didn't know poverty, so they said, all right, so let's design this together, this fellowship, to support others to do public service. So Bill Drayton and I, who, as you may have heard, and many of you, if you don't know, you should look up Ashoka Foundation. He and I were designed it together and set it up in India. And I was in my mid or early 20s, and I ended up, instead of becoming the first fellow, I ended up becoming the first executive director of Ashoka Foundation. And then from there, I developed a passion for supporting others into, going into the development sector, because I had done my rounds, I'd met all the leaders, because to design this program, we went across India, Bill Drayton and I, and met every leader with a vision at the grassroots level and at the national level, people who were doing development work. So that was like a double class. It was like going to, all the cases I knew. It was like going to Harvard Law School, Kennedy School, business school. It was a huge learning. So I then developed this passion for fellowships, strengthening others, especially women, you know, um, giving opportunities to women, creating pathways where, they could balance their responsibilities as caregivers, workers, professionals, and fulfill their passions. So for a long time, I was doing fellowships. So Ashoka, I left in 3 years. I started a more indigenous version of Ashoka, which was Shruti, Society for Rural Tribal Initiative. We gave fellowships to people like Kaluram Dhande, whose house I stayed in. He was a school teacher. Now, you see, we talk about community participation, but how does the community participate when they have to earn all day to earn the meal they're going to eat that day? So you have to free them up to do, for community participation to take place. So I started raising money and giving fellowships to people who are from the community, who could create changes sitting there, not the middle class elite like us, who would go and work with such people, but they would become then the leaders. So really leadership of people, investing in leadership of people who want to work on development issues. And, at a very young age, I got so much support from others that I knew the value, of that support. So I set up Shruti, and then I simultaneously, Mrs. Gandhi was assassinated by, unfortunately, her security guard who was a Sikh. And it led to a lot of riots in Delhi and India in 84. And so I led this, starting with trying to stop the violence, then leading a peace march with a few of us who came together. And then we got into a relief and rehabilitation for the widows and the families. And so I simultaneously did that. And simultaneously, I had, the one person who I met on the roadside when we were trying to stop the violence. There were two cars the day after the violence broke out. The car I was in, and some of my couple of colleagues, friends, development activists. And there was another car of two people who knew the establishment. That is the person I married ultimately, my husband. And we said, you go to, the establishment, and we'll go to the other political parties to call for a curfew. And curfew was already there, but we were ready to have armed forces come in and stop the violence because we realized it was going out of control. So simultaneously, while I was setting up these two organizations, I was making friends with Shiv, who I'd met on the street. And I knew him and I met him on the street that day. I said he couldn't be a bad guy. Anyway, I ended up getting married. So I was doing simultaneously relationship, setting up two NGOs. And once we decided to get married, he was going to the Kennedy School for a year. So I decided to take a year off and come with him. But of course, I ended up doing all kinds of exciting things, including going to the Kennedy School. So having run two fellowship programs, when I was coming back to India after my husband finished his PhD and we got two kids, and I also did my mid-career at the Kennedy School, MacArthur Foundation had this leadership program they were starting in India for mid-careers. So, I was synonymous by then with mid-careers. I had experience, so they thought, why not her? So I ended up working with MacArthur Foundation in India when I came back, and I set up their office. I set up a fellowship program for mid-careers, and then I set up their institutional grants program. So, and my kids were growing up. So I ended up, as soon as my husband finished his PhD, we came to India, which was where we wanted to come back and do the kind of work we learned more about. Going to a school of public policy, which is Kennedy School, and doing a public master's in public administration. I came back and I had two kids also, so young kids. So I worked for MacArthur Foundation, but as soon as my kids grew up, I decided I have to go back to activism. MacArthur was great fun. I told the president of the foundation, I said, it takes me 50% time only to do the work that I'm expected to do in making grants. And since I knew the NGO sector so well that I didn't have to do site visits to figure out, should we fund them? And also I could make out from the reports very quickly what to fix. So it was very easy work for me being a donor. So I spent the other half masquerading under the MacArthur Foundation umbrella and going back to my activism. So what was it that I knew I wanted to do is women's rights. No rights, children, young, whoever, rights violation to me is unacceptable. It drives me to do what I do, but it also drives me lazy. And gender discrimination. So inequality, my approach is you look at inequality, rights violations, you look at creating, finding good solutions, analyzing always what needs to be done, what did we not do, what did we do wrong, and scaling up was another passion. So when I was in MacArthur, I worked with a few people in the US, and I fought with MacArthur Foundation, got them to fund a for-profit agency based in DC, Washington, DC, to develop a scaling up framework. Because why did I do that? I found that India and the world, but India especially, has so many pilots. It's like a graveyard of pilots. And if you want to be a little more positive, optimistic, then you can say it's a junkyard of pilots. So people don't know how to scale up, don't think scale. They think, you do a pilot, it get replicated, is what we used to say when we were young. So I developed the scaling up framework. So one is scale. I helped develop the scaling up framework. So one is scale. You've got to think scale. You can't just keep piloting all your life. And it's not fair to the community if the need is large. You do experiments and you scale up and you understand the who, what, how of scaling up. It's not necessary that if I do a pilot, I scale up, but somebody else has better capability. And how do you ensure the research, the coalition building, everything has to be there in the pilot for you to scale up. So scaling up was a big passion of mine. And if I identified a problem which could be scaled up, I did it. So, Main Kuch Bhi Kar Sakti Hu, when I went back to activism full time, went to PFI, left MacArthur. Since my kids were grown up, I didn't have to do that, balance, I thought, but it never ends, of course. You're once a mother, always a mother. So, then when I moved to PFI, I did some reflection. I said, why is I'm fed up of incremental growth. Why is it on women's issues, for instance, we go 2 steps forward and 1.5 steps backwards, and then we're just maintaining the gains we have made in that half a step. So I decided to, to really review what was going wrong, and I realized that we hadn't worked on changing social norms. And behavior doesn't really change unless social norms are questioned. And we have such rigorous social norms. They are so patriarchal. They are so anti-women, anti-poor, anti-young, it's all anti, and full of violations in people's daily lives. That's when I thought of doing something for changing social norms. And again, this is a great example of the universe conspired to help me. I had no money, but I went to a meeting at BMGF in the head office, and I was supposed to comment on a scaling up framework. So I went like a monkey to perform. I discovered they're looking at scaling up of behavior change communication. I said, wow, this is going to be an opportunity where I'm not contributing. I am going to learn more than contribution. So I learned that there was something called entertainment education, which had huge potential to change behaviors. You've written a paper on that, I know, or an article. Yeah, no, paper. So I decided that I will get the best, entertainment education. If it's going to change large number, we have to do it. I had no money. All I did was I chose one of the finest Bollywood directors in India who had sensitivity, and I brainwashed him into working with me. And I got in touch with Dr. Arvind Singhal, who is at Austin, Texas University, heading the communication department, who's been involved with every behavior change communication in the world, and he's evaluated them, and he is a big entertainment education, and has an understanding. So I caught hold of him, and when I called him, he said, "Desh ke liye kuch bhi karenge." He said, "For the country, I'll do anything." Sure. I said, "I have no money. I have this dream. Can you come to India and do a workshop with my colleagues? And I've got a film director who I want to, seduce more into doing the work. So please come." And he came, and Feroz Khan, the director we chose, who made Gandhi my father, and he's a brilliant theater director. In fact, he learned all about women, and we called the women and women's issues, and we did a program called Main Kuch Bhi Kar Sakti Hu, I, a woman, can achieve anything. So the three of us went on a journey along with several of my colleagues. And in the meantime, there was no money, but the money came. Different gave us, you've heard of an elevator pitch. I never thought I had the ability to do elevator pitch because I'm used to giving money, not asking for money. But I was with a senior person from DFID in an elevator, and and she had heard me speak. I was a plenary speaker at the meeting. She'd heard me speak, and she said, "Oh, let's go up the elevator. I have to pick up my bags, and so we can chat on the way." So you mentioned that you want to change social norms and behavior. So I said, yes, absolutely. In 2 minutes, I told her what I wanted to do. And in 6 months, I had a $2 million grant from DFID to start the season 1 of Main Kuch Bhi Kar Sakti. And, when they found that Main Kuch Bhi Kar Sakti has really impacted communities, we hadn't done the research. I like to evaluate everything I do. I am my worst critique. That's another. I have no fear in critiquing myself and getting others to critique me. I don't deal well with compliments. I feel very uncomfortable. So people know I will be more comfortable getting, because you get great feedback and you learn more from what you did wrong, or you learn what not to do is more important than, or equally important as learning what to do. So we hadn't done the evaluation. It was part of the design and external evaluation. DFID for staff took the Minister for Foreign Affairs, who's the chair of DFID, who leads DFID in the country for the government in England. He went to some rural area and found that women in their project didn't want to talk about what he wanted or his staff wanted to ask. They wanted to tell him about Main Kuch Bhi Kar Sakti Hu, how it's changed their lives. So guess what they did? They gave me a top-up grant. Now I'm a donor. I was a donor before that. I'd never heard of a top-up grant, but I got it. And I didn't even have to do a proposal because it was a top-up grant. And I did season 2. And then Gates came in and gave us some money. Then government came in and gave us some money, saying we wanted to join this, make it into a Swachh Bharat, which is open defecation, to end open defecation, mobilize women. So we said, okay, we'll do it. So we got money from government. So we've done 3 seasons. And then, the founder of the first computer company in India, HCL, I met him. He became an advisor to us on our advisory council. And he said, why do you want to just do a television show? You must do a 360-degree approach, get integrated voice response, get radio, get digital media. That's the future. So I got a couple of, and he introduced me to more people in that community. And we ended up kicking off from not knowing what to do to a 360-degree approach. So with Arvind Singh's help and Feroz's commitment and passion about, working on gender issues, which happened within a sort of period of 6 months, we were all, on a 360-degree approach, which was, we introduced the 360-degree approach. It was a theory. It was something that was just talked about. And we introduced, and we got, the finest minds supporting us. I couldn't have done it on my own or with just the staff, or even money is not enough. It is, Arvind Singh continues to be our advisor. Then a film actor, a young film actor called Farhan Akhtar, then he was younger. He came and said, I asked him to inaugurate season 2, and he said, I want to talk to you. So I said, sure. So I met him, and he said, I want to be a volunteer for Main Kuch Bhi Kar Sakti Hu. I really think what it's doing is amazing. So I said, you have the time? He said, I'll take out the time. So he became, at the end of every episode, he would sum up the episode and go talk about what needs to change. So we suddenly had this spike where our viewership went up, and I'd also been told that Doordarshan will never give free airtime to you. Well, you have to, I learned from Gandhi that you have to persuade people. You have to use a bit of emotion, a bit of everything, passion, and so on, and make an argument that is so compelling. And so it's a combination of these things that get you to do wonderful things for which have an impact on society and others. But in the process, you get so much satisfaction, you get so much sense of achievement that I wouldn't trade my life for any billion or $1 trillion job.
Wow. Poonam, I think both Mans and I have tears.
Let me tell you, it wasn't hard at all.
Yes. And I guess what I'm hearing from you is uh, how, one, you just need to, if you see something, don't just like crib about it, do something about it. And in the process, there are so, like you said, the universe will conspire to help you. There's so many people around you who might join and support your effort, give you advice so that things continue to move forward. So just like taking initiative, taking charge is probably the first step of the journey. And like personally, I feel it's very scary to do something, but like actually doing something is what makes a lot of difference, as we can hear in your story. uh, and two, I think you also spoke about so much time that you spent with the community at the grassroots, and I think it highlights how important, like if you're working in the development sector, it is integral to understand the communities that we're trying to support. And I think the third thing that really that I heard from your story was the importance of talking to people and learning from others through that journey, like not just working with the community, but also talking to others and be keeping an open mind and constantly being flexible, being agile to keep on up. Internalizing the feedback and improving on what you're doing. So these are the, like you said so much and there was so much nuance in your story, but if I had to share three takeaways at my end, I think these would be them.
I'd like to add to your narrative and analysis that, this is also a lot of what I said is not only for the development sector. It is, a lot of universe conspiring if you really want something. Whichever sector you go to, these things are important. And in terms of learning from the community, I'm saying there's no shortcut. So people who think by just getting a degree or going leapfrogging into a very senior position, if you don't know, what are the different parts of work, admin, HR, you have to learn everything to be able to be a leader and a manager, senior manager. So it's common to any profession you may go into.
That makes a lot of sense. In any endeavor, I think these are the qualities that need to be kept in mind. Poonam, you've done such a wide variety of work, like activism, relief work, setting up that fellowship, doing philanthropy, running मैं कुछ भी कर सकती हूँ. So these are such, like in terms of the kind of work you did, they differ a lot. Do you have any takeaways on, like, if you had to compare these different ways of working, what have your experiences been like? What did you like the most?
I liked a lot of what I did. So the learning was as exciting and important as doing. Okay. So, and any problem or any opportunities that is given to you, if you don't take it, it's a lost opportunity, is how I feel. So you take the opportunity and you can learn alongside. You have to keep up with the issues. You have to keep up with the data, the literature. You don't become a geek and read all the time, but you have to, you can't say that, I don't know, I don't need to know what happens out there in the world. You need to know. You need to know what is happening in the education field. How is it linked to population How is population linked to technology? You know, uh, in terms of technology in many different ways, not just contraceptive technology or the data and so on. You need to know how you can use technology to communicate, for instance. So you have to keep up with what's happening in the world. You have to be alert. What did I enjoy doing the most? The enjoying and the pleasure come from being able to create something, being able to change something, being able to produce something. So that is, I mean, there is no kick like that. No alcohol, no drugs, nothing can give you the kind of kick that, achieving something and doing it well, not accepting second rate work. And especially if you're working in the development sector, I always say the poor deserve the best. They deserve better than what we have. So, people would say it's very expensive to do these. I was working with somebody on thinking through long years ago, ambulances, which would, go as little hospitals to the most remote areas. And they said, if you air condition it, I said, the poor deserve air conditioned ambulances. And then we talked about, places where the ambulance couldn't go. So on a donkey, um, a suitcase with all the remote tech, way of testing and so on was going to go. And we call it doc, doc on a donkey. And they kept cutting corners, and I kept saying, no, the poor deserve the best. Let's get the best doc box. So remember, when you're working on these issues and when you're working with other people's lives, when you're working on health issues, as I do, it is unethical not to keep up with the research and not to evaluate what you're doing. So evaluation also gives you, tells you what. So I enjoy the evaluation, whether it tells me what I've done is not so well. It makes me feel, oh my God, I have to go a long way. I have to do a lot more. So you have to have also a very positive attitude. So being positive is something, it is, I have seen so many people have a burnout. So just keeping yourself alive. And the other is having fun. So I went out for a film. I would go to a party. Okay, I couldn't make it at 8 and 9 when all civilized people go. I would crash in at 11 o'clock because I was at work. I kept working, but I have fun too. A lot of activists will wear these very shabby clothes and things. I enjoy dressing up well. I don't worry about what people are going to think of me in the short run. So criticism or speaking truth to power is always unto yourself, unto others. You may make people unhappy in the short run, but long run, everybody's happy. So I must say, experimenting, learning new theories, learning new ways of working, uh, failing doesn't always bring you joy. I would be lying if I said I did, but learning from the failing, if you start focusing on the learning, so that I've enjoyed, learning from my mistakes. So, and other people's mistakes. So, I often say when we created Kuch, we spent a year educating ourselves. See, you can't afford to go too wrong because, it's public money that is being invested in you. So you have to make sure. So, that I enjoy, working towards excellence, going beyond my own capabilities, going beyond other people, pushing them to go beyond their capabilities. That's something else I've enjoyed. It's not about yourself, it's the people you work with. Remember, you can't do anything on your own. Here, this kind of work, you need others. And so you have to invest in them, you have to help them grow, perform. And sometimes people do get a little upset with me for my pushing them too far. But I don't allow that to upset me too much. I know that I'm investing in them and they're going to become better professionals. here or when they leave me. There are people who've left to work with me because I'm pushing them hard, but they've done a great job in the next place. And they've always come back to me saying how much they learned from my, I have young colleagues telling me, I cried after I came out of your room, but that's when I learned the maximum in retrospect. So, working hard and trying to strive towards excellence in any job, but when you're doing development work. So I've learned to do that. Nobody comes to the world perfect, doing excellent things, but so I've enjoyed doing that. I've enjoyed growing and becoming. I've also have to work on your so many aspects. Another thing I've enjoyed is trying to become a better human being, more empathetic, more compassion. At one point, I struggled that I had less compassion for people who were nasty to me. So I learned how to, I remember I used to do these workshops with the Dalai Lama, and he said, you've come for 7 workshops. You don't need to come. Why do you come, my child, every year? I said, I want to learn to be more compassionate. And he said, I can see you're a compassionate person. So when I told him I wanted to learn to be more compassionate towards those who I don't like or who are not good to me, that's a challenge for me. And he told me this wonderful story that changed my, so you have to go for help where you think you need, you have to also keep working, because we all have our jealousies and our, all the traits that human beings have. We have to constantly work towards overcoming. I haven't overcome everything. There's a lot of work still to do and a lot of learning still to do. And so to answer your question on change career, it's the response to a problem, it's learning, and it's bringing in others who have expertise and more experience than you. That's the trick.
And to conclude, if you had to give one advice to your 20-year-old self, what would it be?
So one thing I would say, you can achieve in both men and women, I say that too. With all your other responsibilities, society, and the taboos and everything, whatever challenges you have, you can overcome and really, really do anything. And you owe it to yourself and you owe it to the world to go out there and do what you really want to do, and do it. Don't get too confused. Should I do this? Should I do that? Pick up one thing you can always change and go to ultimately land where you want. And finally, this is funny advice. Some people may think, one reason I've enjoyed my work is because I've moved from livelihoods to reproductive health rights, women's rights, human rights. I've worked on environmental issues. It is so interesting because you're learning and you're moving and you're changing and so on and so forth. And everywhere there is a career opportunity. It would might have been boring if I just stuck to doing only livelihoods. In 30 years, 40 years, I would have been saying the same thing, to an extent, or having a lot of the same experiences. Of course, you can make it more creative and interesting within livelihoods. You can, you can work with artisans, you can work with entrepreneurs, you can do all kinds of things. So make it interesting, make your work fun. Don't allow it to become boring. And the minute it becomes boring, sit back and say, what do I need to do? Do I need to change my career? Do I need to change my job? Do I need to change how I think? Do I need to go back to school? Going to Kennedy School when I was 40 as a mid-career student was so energizing. I learned so much. So there's, keep learning.
That's such beautiful advice. Thank you so much, Poonam. Thanks a lot.
Pleasure. I have greatly enjoyed it.
I'm glad, and I'm sure, both Mats and I think this has made our day, and I'm sure that whoever listens to it, it will make their day as well. And not just day, it will inspire us to do something more, to do something good.